The G20 Summit in Pittsburgh is now drawing to a close on this, the second day of talks there, and some decisions and announcements are beginning to trickle out slowly. Clean Skies' Susan McGinnis is live now in Pittsburgh with the very latest. Susan, let's talk about a major decision that we've seen so far involving fossil fuel subsidies there.
That's right, Tyler. Good afternoon from Pittsburgh. From the G20 Summit is just beginning to come to a close here. That decision on fossil fuel subsidies is one of several that did come out with action pledged, but sort of fell short of promises that were hoped for. The G20 agreed to phase out government subsidies for the heavily polluting industries, the fossil fuel industries like oil and coal, but no date was given for this phase out. It was only said to take place over the midterm. The ministers here were also directed to find a range of options, it was called, for funding climate change mitigation and adaptation for developing countries, but again, no target date, no target number for funding was given there. So action was promised. Promises, though, fell short of expectations. We talked with several experts about this throughout the day. I want to air just some of the comments that we got from a couple of people. Angela Anderson is the Climate Change Program Director at the Climate Action Network. Also, Professor John Kelter with the University of Toronto is the Director of the G20 Research Group. We spoke with these folks about this fossil fuel subsidy decision and also about, in general, climate financing.
The fossil fuel subsidies are a good step in the right direction. Doing that in the medium term, again, probably need to do that faster. If you're going to use that either as a source of finance or a source of emission reductions, midterm is a fuzzy term. That probably means mid-century. That's just not fast enough. But that's a good start, and it's the kind of thing. There are lots of ways that they can raise money for climate finance that doesn't have to put a burden on business or on taxpayers. Things like taxing or putting a levy on the emission reductions that they promised to make anyway. You can generate, just like the cap and trade system in the United States is pledged to set aside some resources for new investment. You could do that internationally as well. That's just one of many ideas that have been kicked around. But they didn't really get into those details, and that's what they're going to have to do between now and December.
The initial signs are encouraging. It was only at the last summit in London that climate change came onto the G20 agenda at all. From the beginning of the preparations for Pittsburgh, the one big issue that the leaders knew they had to do was climate finance, to come up with a credible framework for financing climate change mitigation and adaptation. So the environment ministers at Copenhagen would know that there would be money on offer if they made the concessions to get a new Beyond Kyoto deal. And I think we're moving ahead in that direction.
So a lot of the folks here were looking for more from these decisions, a little bit more detail oriented, but a lot of them really were very optimistic about it, sort of saying that the momentum, Tyler, for the UN climate talks and other climate talks going forward up till Copenhagen have really put the talks back on track that they really felt have been stalled. So there is a lot of optimism here, despite, you know, a lot of the NGOs, non-governmental organizations like the Climate Action Network always wanting more. So also, Tyler, a big feather in Obama's cap, that word came down during our time here. I know you guys have been reporting this, word of the Senate bill coming out next Wednesday. So we will be back in D.C. After this show, and we'll be following presidential news conference that's happening in just a few minutes, just about 4:30 or 4:40. So we'll be getting more details on any climate change decisions that are coming down, and I imagine there's going to be lots of reaction next week to some of those fossil fuel industries, and we'll be watching that, of course, Tyler.
Susan, quick question for you. Anything that you personally expect to hear from President Obama this afternoon that he didn't already lay out in his address at the UN Summit earlier this week regarding the move toward Copenhagen, the move toward a successor treaty to Kyoto?
The one thing we haven't gotten information about is word that there was a bilateral conversation today with Gordon Brown of the UK. So there's been a lot of talk about, will the U.S. step up with emissions targets? Because we know back at the UN last week, that big climate summit there, China and Japan both made big commitments, strong commitments about emissions targets. And there has been not much coming from the United States, also from Canada. So between the Canada and the U.S. and these bilateral talks with the UK's Gordon Brown, we are looking to get a little bit more information about that. But a lot of the thinking here is that those details are not going to be too forthcoming, at least in this speech that's coming up in a few minutes.
All right, should be just about 40 minutes away right now. Susan McGinnis live in Pittsburgh. Susan, thanks for all your coverage this week.